Hello humans! Okay, firing temperature time. It's gonna be a rant. I thought actually maybe instead of just going off on a rant, unstructured rant, I am gonna read some questions that I've been having lately and try to answer them. Maybe that's a little bit, I don't know. But I was thinking also a couple of things. First, disclaimer. I'm gonna put the disclaimer at the end because I'm tired of disclaimers. Everyone's too careful lately. And second, maybe you would like to have my microphone. Hope it was fine. Maybe you would like to have a too long didn't read kind of segment. I think it's gonna be better if I do that at the end for me. So I'm just gonna record it at the end when my thoughts are even more confused and just splice it in here. Too long didn't read. Okay, basically what I'm gonna tell you, watch the rest of the video, is I cannot give you a set temperature, and if I do, it's a ballpark. It all depends on a big series of variables, the biggest of which are which metal you're using, how big and how powerful your kiln is, how big your piece is, how many layers your piece has, thick, thin, complete or partial, the firing surface you're firing on, if it's metal, if it's ceramic fiber, etc. If it's on a trivet and there's heat coming from below, this is going to heat up faster. If the supports were outside the kiln or inside and they were already hot, I mean, I can give you a time and I can give you a temperature that's worked perfectly for me and for a piece, and you may even make exactly the same piece at home in a different kiln, maybe with a different network power in another continent. This is not gonna work for you. I can almost guarantee that it's not gonna work for you. It's not gonna be exactly the same. So you need to find out what temperature works for you, and you need to find out when you need to take the piece out of the kiln. I personally am against timing, although it can work in certain circumstances. So there is no answer to this question, I'm afraid. Guidelines: set your kiln at 820 for silver, 900 for copper. If it's very big silver, very small copper, maybe the opposite. Ignore manufacturer's temperatures given by melting temperatures, whatever. Don't listen to that. Ignore your temperature display. Sometimes I think we should throw the whole thing away. The pyrometer, the temperature display, it's a crutch. It doesn't help you. It distracts you from what's going on inside of the kiln. That's what you need to know. You need to take the piece out of the kiln when it's ready. And what ready means varies throughout the story of the piece, from the beginning to the end layer. The more layers you have, the longer the story is, the more complicated it gets. What you want to do at that moment, the workflow you want to arrive to, what your goal is, not mine. So I cannot answer your question. You need to find out and you need to practice. There's no other way. So maybe this is not the answer you wanted. Watch the rest of the video for more blah blah blah. Okay, so let's go. What I'm gonna do is, I've been having a lot of questions on my Facebook group and also on my Patreon. And I did try to reply to them, although sometimes there are so many that I'm just like, I don't have time. So maybe I've missed some. But if you just go to this Facebook group and you type temperature or firing on the search box, you're gonna get tons of stuff in there. Because I think this is the most asked question. And actually lately, I don't know if it's me, but it seems to have increased tenfold. So it's really on people's minds. So that's good, because that also means we have beginners. We have people that are trying to do this. They're starting on this, so there's hope for the future. Because sometimes I think some crafts go a little bit out of fashion, and that's not good. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the questions. I'm not going to mention anyone's names, because even though this group is public, I didn't ask them permission to mention them by name. So I'm just going to read the question or part of the question, and maybe even read part of my answer, and then try to elaborate on that. Maybe I can just clip this on. Okay, so first question. Whoa, I don't have my reading glasses on. So this person is relatively new to enameling, and she's asking, saying, once I get the temperature up in the kiln, when you open the door, obviously the temperature drops dramatically. Does anyone have any advice for how long you leave the piece in for from the dropped temperature? Different enamels say they have to be fired at different temperatures. Help or tips appreciated. Okay, so there's several things, all the things are going on here. One of them, let's get it out of the way first, the manufacturer temperatures. Just ignore this, please. I don't know if they are trying to be helpful, but they are not being helpful. The way these people make the enamels, of which I will admit I don't know much, but I know that they put the stuff in there, the materials, the ingredients, it's a furnace, and maybe they stay there for 24 hours, for 2 days, because they have to really melt with each other. And okay, they can measure when an enamel, liquefies or softens, melts. I mean, a different enamel will have different viscosities depending on the chemistry of the glass and stuff, but none of this is relevant to us, to an enamelist, craft enamelist, art enamelist. Maybe someone that makes bathtubs can streamline the process because they always use the same enamel, they have the same kiln, it's a chain kiln, whatever. For us, this is not relevant at all. It may give you a little indication. Let me get a chart. Alright, so I have a chart here. This is from a shop that doesn't exist anymore. There was a brick and mortar shop in Barcelona, and if you know the shop, you already know which shop I'm talking about. It's now closed. The owner retired, but I'm following it backwards. Anyway, you may have a look here. So you have a color, and you have here some indications. A T or an O for transparent, opaque, and then asterisks like 1, 2, 3. So this meant hard, medium hard, or soft, fusing. So there was no temperature, and I believe now maybe Soye gives you a temperature. But this was great because it's telling you that relative to each other, some colors are harder than others, and you want them to be so. Like, for example, we have here the fluxes, and the fluxes are 3 stars. Well, number 3, silver is 2, although I think it's pretty hard. But this helped you to know that if you put a soft enamel on top of a hard enamel, that's mostly how you want it to be. If you do the opposite, you are gonna get breakup effects. And okay, that is interesting to know, and you may want to do that for special effects. But mostly, if you are trying to control what's happening, you want to put hardest underneath and then softer. There is like a melting point which we'll never want to even get close to, so forget about that. But there is also another aspect which I kind of felt throughout these years, the kids enameling, which is that certain amount of stiffness, I suppose viscosity of the enamel. Some enamels, normally the softer ones, but not always, they kind of stay where they are, and if they're bumpy, they stay bumpy, even if you fire them hard, or a little bit bumpier than others, and others really liquefy and flow easier. So this also affects how an enamel interacts with each other, even though maybe the hardness is not so different. So how do you even know what to do with this information? Well, one thing you can do, which is actually useful to you, you could do hardness palettes. And to be honest, I have not done this. I've been thinking about it for ages, and in the end, I don't know if I'm ever gonna do it. It's almost because it's cool to do. But you have, this is Andreu's book, which I published in English, translated and published, and he talks about many types of palettes, and here are the hardness palettes. So this allows you to compare an enamel to each other. Like, for example, you see here the green dots. This is his kind of witness enamel that you would use always on your palettes or in a series of palettes. Like, he has it here in the middle also. You would ideally take a medium fusing enamel, and then you fire until that one is mature, like shiny, and then you compare all the others to it. It's good to do these palettes round because then they mostly get heat evenly distributed. If you make a very long palette and your kiln is not too big, the enamels are gonna fire faster at the back, or my my kiln fires hotter on the left. So if the palette is very close to the side of the kiln, you could have some false readings there. So better that it's not too big for the kiln. I'm round, I'm fire in the middle of the kiln, and then you get this information. How do they relate to each other? I forgot about the microphone. Well, I guess I'm gonna have to adjust the levels manually. So, do you need this? It depends on the techniques you like to work with. For some techniques, I can imagine that for cloisonné, for example, to a certain extent, you need to know what's going on with the harness. But you are putting layers. Personally, I would not go to much further than orange peel as I'm layering, because there's no point on it. I just, I will mention this later, hopefully, if I remember, about amount of firings and time in the kiln and interactions that happen there. So you want to limit that. So the shorter the firings, always the better, relative to the other things. But then at the end, you are even going to polish it, grind it, maybe even not fire polish, you're maybe going to polish it by hand. So the relative hardnesses, I would say, are less important, maybe. Depends how you work. For champ-levé, maybe it doesn't matter either, because you are going to grind it yourself. For applying even layers, just say you make simple earrings that are just one color on a disc, it doesn't matter at all. But if you are making painted enamel pieces, which means you're just applying enamel without any kind of cell, and it's a painting, and this is what Andreu did. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. Also opalescence, paint, layering, and an enamel next to another, just next to another without any cell. You need to know how these are going to interact with each other throughout your firings. You need to plan your fires. You need to know what's going to happen. And then those palettes are very useful. I tend to work smaller, and I kind of always use the same color palettes, color families, and I haven't found that I needed to do it. On the other hand, there are other things I need, which is like more complex palettes. Like I have a video about that here on YouTube. Anyway, all of this is to say that I would completely ignore the recommendations unless they are vague, in which case they may be helpful. But if they are too precise, that this enamel melts at 837 degrees centigrade, what are you going to do with this information? It's not useful to you, unless, as I say, relative to each other. So if one says 380 and the other says 910, you know that that one is harder fusing. And maybe how they relate to each other may be a little helpful information. But it means nothing to you, because you would have to measure this every single time you fire to know what you need at that particular moment, because of the size of the piece, because of the thickness of the layer, because of your kiln, because of so many things that we will talk about later maybe. Although it's really kind of irrelevant, because what you need to do is to fire your piece until it's ready at that moment. So you have a goal, and you need to, and it changes throughout the story of the piece as it gets from the beginning to the end. Unless it has only one layer, then it's a very short story. But you may even have to plan your layers, and you need to do certain things at certain times. And if you know what you want, you know what you need to get at every stage, and that's all you need to do. And that's all you need to know. All of the other information, it's kind of flexible and irrelevant. And one can go up while the other goes down. Like temperature can go up, and time will go down, and each layer will be different. Each kiln is different. So I'm afraid I'm not going to give you any fast guidelines, any quick rules that then you don't have to think about it anymore. And eventually, you will not have to think about it anymore. You just need to develop a little bit of intuition, which just comes with practice. And humans do this so well. The best things we do is do things with our hands. Like a cat just jumps. They don't do calculations and calculate speeds and friction. They just jump, and they jump a few times as a kitten, and then they got it, and they do it, and we do the same. So don't be afraid. Just fire some things, make some little things, make palettes, fire them, get to know your kiln. You get a new kiln, you're probably gonna have to get to know it again. You change your working style from small to big panels, then you're gonna have to have a learning process there. So temperature recommendations from the manufacturers, ignore them. Okay, what else did she ask? The temperature drops. Okay, doesn't matter. I mean, it matters to a certain extent. If you already started with a low temperature, what I would consider a low temperature, it may drop too much. In which case, raise your temperature, always. Some people fire very low, some people fire extremely high, and it works for both of them. So you need to find your workflow. I'm going to tell you what I like, which is short firings, as short as possible, and I will explain why later. And what's there at the kiln, the indicators. Look, there was this guy that I listened to some podcasts sometimes, some scientist, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, but he said something that really stuck with me. Something like, there are technologies that help you develop your own skills, and there are technologies that actually make your skills kind of degrade. And you can think of it as the technology of a map. It will help you so much more to navigate the landscape, to get somewhere. And the more you get to know the map and your compass and whatever, the better you will orient yourself. You will get to know the city, the streets, whatever. But then the GPS, it's great. I mean, you can just go get somewhere, hopefully. But you will forget how to navigate. You will forget where north is, if you ever knew. And it will just slowly erode your capabilities. And I'm starting to think that the temperature display does this to us. So I have an image in my mind right now of, just watch it, this one. This guy is firing in a gas kiln in the 19th century. He just puts it on, and before that it was coal or wood. He puts it on and he has to learn to fire on this kiln by experience, by color. There is no temperature indicator, there is no pyrometer, there is nothing. He can put it on and he can put it off. He can put a piece in, open the door, it will cool down. Close the door, it will start heating up. That's all. That's how people used to do things. That's how we have been doing things for most of enameling history. And it's fine. Look at the museum. It's amazing, the things you can do like this. I was just, in one of these questions from Facebook, someone mentioned that she was enameling in the 70s in some school, and they just had the kilns on, and they actually left the door a little open so they wouldn't get red hot. And I was like, wow. So, I mean, I was mostly wow about the door open because I know that there used to be no pyrometers, no temperature displays. But indeed, if you just leave your kiln on, I've always heard like it would just melt down. I don't know if it actually melts down. I'm sure that the spirals, the resistance, the elements will degrade faster. That you're wasting a lot of energy by leaving the door open, unless it's too cold, I guess. And then you turn the heating off. But how else do you adjust the temperature in the kiln if there is no pyrometer, no indicator of any kind? Well, you start learning to see the temperature of the kiln by the color. So it starts like sorry about that. I'm gonna mute my phone. You start seeing that it's like cherry red, and it starts getting more red and more orange, bright yellow. Eventually, it gets white hot, and it could melt down. So you just learn what happens when you put a piece in the kiln at whichever temperature is there. The temperature indicator, is it accurate? It could be. I see it more as a vague, gross guideline. You have amazing kiln like Patsy Croft's kilns. Apparently, I don't have one. Apparently, they have thick insulation and they're powerful and very precise. So you know that what the temperature you have is that. Now, I'm sure this is super useful for some workflows and purposes, but you don't need to make those amazing pieces that you see in the museum, obviously. It depends what you want. When you start talking to someone on the internet and they ask you, what temperature do you fire this to? And I may say, I fire this at 8:30. My kiln doesn't have a temperature indicator. it only has like a temperature target. I set the temperature, and there is a red light and a green light. Like it is up to this temperature or more, or not, and then it means it's running. So it turns itself on and off. That's it. It's super old, like I don't know, 30, 40 years. I bought it secondhand. It was ancient. I've never had it serviced. I mean, yeah, when I bought it, we changed the elements because they broke, and that's it. I was like in the late 90s or early 2000s, and I haven't had it serviced ever since. And I really think it's firing much hotter than it used to. Like with that temperature I indicate, it gets more white. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The only problem is that when people ask me what temperature you fired, I'm going to tell them something, and I never knew what it was because I never measured with some accurate gizmo. And it has changed, I'm sure. So what is this telling you? This is telling you not much. Also because every kiln is different. Even if they're made in an assembly line, probably there are some small difference there. You have different sizes, different doors, different insulation. Also, I've been thinking, maybe it's the net has something to do with how it reacts, how it interacts. Here in Europe, we have 240 volts, and in the US, you have 120. And I'm sure this has to have some effect, and the speed at which the electricity, I don't know how this works. I'm not an electrician. I should probably ask my boyfriend. He's an engineer, but it has to have some effect. How big it is, how the heat capacity it has, can it produce heat? Does it get up to temperature fast or slow? What did you put in there? Is there kiln furniture in there? How big the door is when you open it? If it's a short kiln for its capacity, it will lose less temperature than it has a tall door. If you see Phil Barnes, he was making these vessels, and he had kilns with big door, and he set his kiln at 1,000 degrees centigrade, which is the maximum. It supposedly doesn't do more. I think, what? Even to me, this is kind of crazy, even though everyone thinks I'm crazy because I maybe fire at 9:30. But he was firing vessels, he had a tall door. Maybe the kiln didn't have the same heat capacity for that mass that he was firing than if you have tiny jewelry. So many factors, so many variables. It's impossible. You can only give a vague guideline to get someone started. But what you need to do is get started. Fire some things in your kiln. Fire things similar to what you want to do. What do we have here? We have different metals. We have different thicknesses of metal. We have different sizes of pieces. We have different thicknesses of layer. Not only in general, depending on the technique you're using and what you're doing, but also throughout the history of the piece. You will start with few layers. It may end pretty thick, depending what you're doing. So how am I going to give you an indication? I'm sorry, but you're going to have to look at your piece. And you're going to have to see if it's ready and just take it out. This is the only thing I can give you. You need to figure it out on your own. I cannot tell a child how they have to start walking. How do they put their feet in front of the other? They have to fall a few times. And then they get it so quickly. So just don't be afraid. Just do it. And something will come out. Everyone says this. But I think it really doesn't sink in us. That you only learn from failures. If you do something right, you learn to nothing. You don't know why it went right. You don't know why it worked. It worked maybe by chance. But if you do something wrong, you learned a few things. Not all the things there are to learn about, but you learn some things. That's the only way to learn. Really. I think the biggest problem in the education system is that you are trying very hard not to fail. But then what are you learning? You're maybe memorizing a few things. Okay, the rest of the question, let's see. So once the temperature is up, when you open the door, the temperature drops dramatically. Stop looking at the temperature display. Put a sticker in there. It's a crutch that doesn't help you. You need to develop your own intuition. You need to look at the temperature, at the color of the kiln. Does it drop? We don't care. We put the piece in the kiln. We see what's going on. We take it out. And we look at it. Look. Some people are afraid of looking in the kiln. And indeed, you may damage your eyes if you're doing this all the time. I'm not gonna get there into risk, benefits, exposure, time. Do your own research. We all do this now. Get those glasses, you know? But you don't even need to look in the kiln. You can just take the piece out and look at the piece. Yeah, the piece will radiate a little bit when it comes out. It's still red, but nothing like the kiln. Just take it out. Does it make the kiln cool down and the piece cool down? Yes, but it doesn't matter. Put it back in. Don't wait too long, especially if it's copper, because then you will have start to have some oxide chipping off the edges or bare areas. But just take it out and look. In the beginning, maybe you are doing this a lot. You're opening the kiln door a lot. Actually, I do this a lot when I'm giving a class and I'm explaining something and I'm talking and I lose sense of time. So I'm like, oh my God, I need to open the kiln. And it's probably done. And it's not even, it's been there 10 seconds. And I open the door all the time and people are probably thinking, what is she doing? But it doesn't matter. Just put it back in. It will take longer to fire. It's better to fire it quickly, but it's not the end of the world. And you learn so much from doing this. So eventually you will start doing it less. You would get an intuition. Really, it's an intuition. You don't think when you walk. So anything you do a lot, you will develop an intuition. And it's so rewarding. You are in flow states and it just happens, you know. So I encourage you to just practice. Okay, more things. So yes, don't close the door of the kiln and wait for anything to happen. The only thing you have to wait for is what's happening inside the kiln. Nothing about what's happening outside the kiln. No temperature indicator, no click clack. I don't know if it's running. I don't care. Just care about the piece. Now that you've put it in, that's it. There's nothing. You cannot go back in time and think, oh, I should have put the temperature higher. You have to fire at least a little bit. Otherwise, this enamel is going to fall off. If the firing is too long, you may have problems. I hope I get back to that. And that's it. Just give it a try. Okay, what did I say actually? Ignore the display temperature. Ignore manufacturer temperature. It's not important. Don't time. You need to fire a piece until it's ready, and neither the temperature you set, the temperature displayed, nor any random timing recommendation you get from someone on the internet, including me, is going to indicate when your piece is ready to be taken out. Alright, another question. The firing temperature of an enamel is, say, 800. What do you set your kiln to? So, same question basically. What temperature you set your kiln to? Alright, again, as I mentioned, if I say 830, maybe it's 850, maybe it's 810. Ballpark temperatures. And I'm talking about Celsius. I will write on screen what the Fahrenheit, I can't recall. I would, at least as a starting point, I would guide myself by size of the piece and metal. So that kind of almost goes together, because if you are working with silver, mostly you're not making a big panel with 0.7 millimeter silver. It may happen, but it's very rare. Mostly silver is going to be some small jewelry. Copper, maybe large panels. Look, I have some panels here. So, little panel, piece of jewelry. They're both copper. This actually feels very light, probably 0.5 millimeter copper. But it's like, I don't know, 8 by 12 or something. And this is like 4 centimeters on its side or so. Looks very thin. I'm not gonna fire them at the same temperature. However, copper needs some temperature, especially when the first firing, the first layer. So what's going on here? So the first layer that you fire copper creates oxide, copper oxide. So all metals kind of do some, well, gold doesn't do much. It's quite inert. But copper and silver, they have some sort of oxides or other chemicals that they produce. Copper creates this thick layer of fire scale and many other things. You see copper roof somewhere, it's green or brownish or whatever, depends on the atmosphere. So lots of chemical reactions. It's a very reactive metal. So it would turn black on its own if you leave it there slowly. But temperature increases all chemical reactions sometimes it's extraordinarily fast. So when you put a piece of copper in the kiln, you probably noticed, it goes black. And that's another thing. But it creates this layer of oxide. So even if you put enamel there, this happens the first layer. This happens because of oxygen. That's why it's called oxidation. So it's a reaction. Oxygen is an extremely reactive element. Our atmosphere is flammable. This planet doesn't go up in flames, I don't know why. So it just happens because there's oxygen here. So the kiln is not in a vacuum. Maybe that would be cool. So you put it there and it's hot and there's oxygen and it just creates this layer of oxide. If there is enamel on it, it's not really sealed in the enamel because there's just some grains there. So the oxygen is getting to the surface of the copper and it happens. So the first layer basically has to stick to the copper despite the oxide that is being generated. If you fire very slowly, the oxide is going to start getting really thick before the glass has even had a chance to melt, and you're going to have a delamination. And I've seen this several times on people asking, what is happening? Just the enamel completely delaminating, and you see the back of the enamel is black or reddish. This is different forms of copper oxide. It could not stick. It's making a resist on the surface. So what needs to happen here is that the entire thing has to get hot enough that the glass is going to melt and stick to the metal faster than the oxide is going to get too thick. So you need a high temperature for the first layer at least. The next one, okay, we can debate that. But the first layer of copper, and okay, you can create cool effects. So you can get like a red, this oxide is there and it can be cool. But once you start firing it again, it's going to start changing. But if you only fire it once, you could get something cool in there. Everything can be used to your advantage. Your creativity is yours. But I'm just telling you why this is happening. So you need a high temperature, especially if the piece is big, because your kiln needs to heat everything here. This is so much more mass than this. So set your kiln higher. At least I would say 900. 900, even 950 if the piece is big. If the kiln is not powerful, you want to start higher. So when you open the door, you put the piece in there, all this mass, it doesn't drop too much and it doesn't take too long to get there. So that's copper. Of course, if you are putting an opaque enamel on it, maybe it doesn't matter too much. It matters in the sense that if you get this delamination, it's not going to stick. But if the enamel doesn't clear the oxide, it doesn't matter as much. So as long as the mechanical kind of stickiness of one thing to another, this kind of engineered material that has different layers now, like plywood, if it's stable, it's stable. But if you want to clear the oxide with a copper flux, this oxide doesn't disappear. It has to go somewhere. So it's dissolved in the glass. So the metal creates oxide and it's dissolved in the glass. It's just not enough to do much. Because that's how we color. Glass is with metal oxides. Nothing else survives, it just vaporizes and just burns and leaves a little ash. But metal oxides survive these high temperatures. So blue is cobalt oxide. Copper makes green. So if you have a green enamel, then most likely it's made with copper. It can also be chrome. Have you had a piece that you put in the kiln with some flux and you forgot about it? And then you took it out and it was green. So this is copper oxide, too much copper oxide. So it kept on making copper oxide. It will keep on making copper oxide all throughout the firing of the piece. But once there is no oxygen reaching it anymore because it's kind of sealed, it will do it so much more slowly than the first. The first layer is crazy, right? But if you forget it there, it will keep on doing it. It's going to start turning green. So if you want transparency, you want it to happen as quickly as possible so that the oxide is not developing so much. And so you have a chance to clear this oxide, dissolve it in the layer flux as quickly as possible. And then you get a beautiful flux layer. With silver, kind of. And here, I'm not sure that anyone has the very clear answer, but sometimes on silver you also get discolorations. Some fluxes more than others. obviously use a silver flux. There are two ways to counteract this kind of. This is basically not oxide, but whatever. It's some element from the silver is creating this orangey, brownish, yellowish discoloration, which is actually like coloring. You can color glass with silver, like a nitrate or something. I don't know. So you want to avoid this. As I mentioned, temperature increases the rate, the speed, a lot of chemical interactions. Say you have a pot of water and you put some salt in it or sugar, and you can stir and stir and stir, and it will start dissolving. But if you put it at the heat, it's going to dissolve immediately. So this is the same, but at much higher temperature. Okay, my video stopped for some reason. Maybe too long. If you want to stop or limit the reactions of the silver into the silver flux, again, you want this to be sealed as quickly as possible. And maybe you want to limit the temperature a little bit, but you also want the temperature to limit the time. So you have to, it's a balance. Temperature, time. More temperature, less time, which is good. More time, less temperature. So you find a balance there. And I would say for jewelry pieces, I would set my kiln at maybe 110 or so, which probably means 830 because it's firing hotter. Maximum, perhaps. Again, depends on the size, probably not going to be very large. Just to limit the interactions. Again, number of firings. Every time you do this, more on the first layer, but although maybe for the silver not, because it's not oxidation, it's not oxygen. I don't know. I don't think maybe oxygen has anything to do with it, but it keeps on happening. So limit the amount of firings as much as you can. Limit the time it is in the kiln. If the first layer doesn't need to be shiny, don't do it. Just do an orange peel. Keep on doing orange peel until you kind of almost finished, and then you can make glossy. Plan your firings, keep them low. Use a flux that has a purplish undertone, like Soyer 3, which will just optically counteract the yellowing because the opposites in the color wheel. So they just cancel each other out. That helps a little bit. So all those things will help you a little bit with these discolorations. Let's go back to the questions. My kiln drops about 30 degrees when I open the door. Yeah, we talked about that. Do I wait until it's back? No. I've done okay so far, but overfire a few pieces. That's because you waited. Okay, so another question. Hello, can you advise at what temperature the enamel should be heated so that the enamel doesn't melt completely, but also does not fall off? Yeah, I don't know what you mean with melt completely. Indeed, you don't want it to melt so much that it liquefies and drops off. A lot of things are going to happen there. Maybe you're going to have a ball of mixed glass metal because it becomes liquid. Again, I cannot give an answer to this question because there's not enough information here. So the size of the piece, the metal that you're using, temperature that you set your kiln on is one of the variables. So you could have a range, and then we will see how long it's going to have to stay there by how the piece reacts. The technique, are the layers getting thicker and thicker? All of these things influence the temperature and the time, so I cannot give an answer. Another question. Okay, this is an older question. It's again the same question, but I'm going to read it again because of my answer here. So when I open the kiln door, temperature drops. Yeah. Now, I've always timed my enameling by eye and instinct blind luck, but I would like to get more organized. If I want to fire a piece, for example, at 150F, I guess it's 1500F, for 2 minutes, and the temp has dropped, I assume I wait until the temperature goes back up. So my answer to that was, you're trying to go backwards. By eye and feel is the way to go and develop your skill further. Unless you're doing very repeatable production of specific techniques, timing is a crutch that doesn't let you develop your muscles. temperature you set is just a ballpark. If it drops a lot, simply set it higher. So don't try to make it, this person was doing the right thing, in my opinion, and they just wanted to be more scientific. This can work very well for you, and some people do that. They have a workflow that is just really tight, and they work at certain sizes, and they work with certain thicknesses, and they do this technique, and they have developed a wonderful system that works perfectly for them, and they're probably much more efficient than I am. But if you are a bit like me and you fly from flower to flower and you do this and then you do that and you do big and then you do small and silver and copper and gold, it's impossible. You can't time it. I have timed when I was doing the same thing again and again. And I figured one out and I wrote it down because I will forget. And I did that and it worked. If you're doing that, please do. But know that you can develop a sense for it too. And I think that's so much more rewarding personally. It depends on your personality. So that's another thing. Okay, so we go back to this person that had problems on copper. Hello, bear with me, I'm new. Look, one of the gifts in this world is to be a newie. How is it? Shoshin. So savor it. It's so cool to learn new things, to have this world that's opening up to you. Don't come with a dumb question. This is the best, really. So I'm experiencing cracking on the border. And Pete's, what would be going wrong? Using Soye Flux 3 and it looks like the piece is copper. First, wrong flux. It's not wrong, but you're going to get some texture there. It doesn't clear that perfectly. So how long also to dissolve the oxides and what temp do you do it? Again, you want an answer and there is no one answer. But I see that this person has a pretty good coverage. For a newie, this is great. I will put these images on screen. And there are some pits. And the edges look fine for me, for copper. So enamel wants to, all things when they become liquid, they want to form a ball. So it wants to crawl from the edges towards the center. So you get bared edges and you get a bit of shrinking in there. I don't know if it's going to want to focus on that. So for me, this is the nature of copper. And I just try to embrace it. It is a little bit gunky, grungy. You can fight it, and some people do, and they do it very successfully. I don't. If depends what you use it for. Maybe you set it and you cover the edges. You can add a little bit more enamel on the edge, even on the first layer. Like make a tiny rope at the edge so that you have more stuff in there, so that when it shrinks there's still more. Put some pressure there or something. But mostly to me, that's just the nature of copper. It probably also happens in silver, but you just don't see it because it's not a black edge. You can just clean it up, grind it every time, clean the edges of copper, otherwise you get these oxide bits. And at the last layer, I never clean it. Some of it falls out on its own, and it starts getting dark red, black with years. And I just think that's the beauty of copper. If you don't like it, you can try to fight it, as I said, or you can move on to another metal that doesn't do this. Then the pits, however, that means your layer was too thin. You just need to learn to apply the right layer for the right size, for the right technique. I have some classes about metal preparation, wet packing gradations. You can go check that out if you want. The best teacher always practice. If you have guidance, it will shorten your your learning curve a lot. But try to think through what you're doing. Try to understand why things are the way they are. Sometimes we just get knowledge from people, traditions, and that's great because it's like evolution. It was done that way for a reason. The problem is that with time, sometimes the reasons are lost. So a person will go through the trouble of testing and seeing what works for them, and then they pass it on to you. And if they forget to tell you why, then you are a step behind always, and you can go back there by just testing it yourself and getting yourself in trouble, making those mistakes and seeing why and what works. And that's also good because sometimes things change, you know. Now we have these kilns that they didn't have when they had only gas or whatever. The enamels change throughout, you know, the raw materials are coming from different mines, from different processes. They're not the same. You have vintage enamels and you compare them, even the same number, it's not the same. So it's good to know why you do things and to sometimes bring something to failure to see what's going on here so that you can get yourself out of trouble when it happens. That's what I think. Okay, I don't know if I missed anything. I'm gonna go have a quick look. Meanwhile, maybe I can record too long, didn't read. If you want to learn more about how I do things, maybe that's the disclaimer. This is my opinion. This is how I do things. This is what I've learned. Other people completely disagree, which is fine. There's many ways to do things, enameling for sure. So if you want to know more about how I work, all the stuff I do, all the techniques I do, I have a Patreon. You can join for a bit and see if you like it. There's like 100 videos or something in there already. This is my favorite book, and that's why I translated it from Spanish to English. It's available. I have some other videos here on YouTube that are free to watch. They're outdated, but they're still okay. I'm telling myself they're still okay. Join the Facebook group if you want. I cannot spend a lot of time there because it's just too much. Life's too much. But I check now and then I approve posts. So if you post something, it's gonna maybe take a few days for it to be approved. I have to do it manually because Facebook is a mess. I don't do automatic moderation. It's a public group, so it has to be moderated manually. There's a lot of people there that know a lot. They have different opinions than me, but they have great opinions. Just ask your questions. There are no stupid questions. Really. And most of all, enjoy. Okay? By the way, I also have classes, online classes that you can get. All the links and all of that underneath here. This is also going to go into my Patreon, but it's going to be public for you. And any questions, ask here, ask on Facebook, ask on Patreon, okay? Or send me an email. All right, so I'll see you around. Bye-bye.